Hey, how you doing? Let's do it to it. Okay. The new section that we're going into is called Fighting Against Space. Fighting Against Space. We've seen the benefit that an advancing in space bestows upon its owner. So if you advance upon, you gain more space. So that's what we've learned. However, this doesn't mean that spatial challenge players has to roll over basically and give up. They don't have to roll over and just give up. In general, there are four ways to deal with space. One, exchange pieces so your limited territory is no longer uncomfortable. Two, use pawn breaks to break to crack to break what seemingly is like big. So let me see. Use pawn breaks to crack his seemingly indestructible pawn center, our side of the board, just pawn chain of whatever. Trying to prove that your opponent's gain in space has left weak squares in its wake. So, like outposts, we talk about holes for knights to put themselves into. Every pawn move gives a weakness in the position. So if you do one pawn move, if you do a pawn move like to take space, maybe you do e4 to e5. Beside the e4 pawn, those two spots have become weak, and those are kind of what's left behind. I'll show you what I'm talking about. And we're gonna do editing board. If you play this here, we'll take these things off the board and this off the board. When you push this, it will take this off the board. You push this pawn, it gave up these squares here. Those squares are no longer protected, so a knight could actually jump in here, and a knight could jump in here. Because every time you push to gain more space, you lose something, and that's what they're talking about. Treating a space gaining enemy pawn center as a traitor. Basically, what you can do is by having it as a traitor is something like this. You could put a knight right in front of it on e4, and this is what they're talking about as a traitor. This one pawn ends up stopping this bishop from being able to come out, so this pawn is a traitor to that bishop, and it can't. It won't be able to do anything for the position. You'll have a problem, and that'll just be now this pawn doesn't help you, it hurts you, it hinders you. Exchanging pieces, and this is a position that we're going to be looking at, so I'm going to erase the board. We've already discussed piece exchanges as a means of soothing the pain of the constricted position. Here's a basic example, and we're going to take a look at the basic example right here, and I'll get it set up for us, and then we'll look how it's handled. And we'll get a bishop and two rooks, a queen, a bishop, two rooks, excuse me, and then a queen. Perfect. Okay, dokie, and it's black to move here. Okay, make it into a study. Chapter is called Exchanging Pieces. Our exchange pieces. So exchange. I appreciate your patience about waiting for this. Perfect. And we're going to look at it from Black's perspective, because that's who is playing at this present moment. White enjoys, this is what, now we're going to talk about what white, from Black's perspective, we're going to see what white enjoys. White enjoys central and queenside space. He also has a very good bishop, while black seems inactive. Of course, if black's a pawn was on a6, um, and white's was on a5, then black's bishop would be turned into a tall pawn, and white's advantage would be decisive. So basically, if black had a pawn here, it'd be a tall pawn, and it would be basically over. And if white had a pawn there, you basically it'd be so decisive, because this bishop is basically a pawn. It's lost all of its value. Okay. Here we'll let a couple of rules guide us. Trade bad minor pieces for good ones. That's rule 1. Get your bishops outside the pawn chain, rule 2. And exchange pieces when you have less space, rule 3. With so many rules smacking us in the face, black's move is a no-brainer. And of course, we get to see it. Kaboom. Bishop a6. Activating the bishop and forcing an exchange. Activating the bit. Okay, we already did that. So f to b8. Bishop takes. Queen takes. And then queen c2. And this is we're trying to exchange to relieve space. Intending to trade the rooks via rook b followed by rook b8. So basically the idea of this move is to trade here, and then bring that rook over and trade the last rook off. That's the plan. Rook b3, rook takes b3, and then pawn takes. This puts a threat to the pawn. Rook b8 now. White remains a rook is staring at the a7 pawn. White's remaining rook is staring at the a7 pawn, but black's rook will be snapping at the b3 pawn. So it's looking at the b3 pawn is just as good. So this rook is attacking here. That rook is looking there. Both queens are protecting here, and that queen is protecting there. So it's kind of like they're twins almost. They're of the same kind of setup, but just a little bit different. All the setup of protection is the same, not where the pawn is. Queen c3. This has one kind of idea in the wake of it. White wants to play potentially b3 or b4, potentially swing the queen over to a3, and then cause the rook to have to guard here and make the rook passive. So that's kind of White's idea. That's why that queen c3 was made. And potentially we could actually have more trades that happen. Queen here or queen there is an idea. That would exchange off, and if the queen exchanges, the rook took, the rook takes, and that takes. Now you got a rook on the 7th to eat up these black pawns. There's also one other line that could be played. Rook a6. Rook b4. Oh, not b5. Rook b4. King h2. Queen b7. Rook a3 to guard. And then a5. And the position is actually at this point draw. It's an equal position. Let me get a sip of tea and then we'll get started. So rather than allowing that to come to pass, we have black going to b7, rook a3. Rook a4 gives black all the play after. So if rook a4, rook a5 exclam, this gives black all the play. Rook takes a5, queen takes, king f8, f7, exclam at this point. It's kind of funny, you'd think, wait a second, that's not a very good move. Shouldn't you just take back the pawn? There's really no rush to do that. Rook A, and then queen b4. This is a big time move here, queen b4. Queen takes and rook takes. This d pawn's going to fall. The reason the king, now you get to see why the king coming up to f7 is vital. If the rook, let me see here. I want to make sure I have this. Takes b4. Once mighty space advantage no longer counts for anything after king f2, rotates d4, and white will draw, but black can play a bit and let his opponent kind of try to make a piece. As you can see, black's game is actually easier to handle, since in some lines the white king can find itself in an uncomfortable situation. So like if the rook came here, the king could just come over. If the king came here, you actually have this type of a problem here, and then you'd have to start attacking here, and then you could take there, and after takes here. This is actually almost losing. So you got to be really careful with that type of play. That's why they played rook to a3. Okay, king f7. Black needs to be able to defend f7 in many lines. King f2 and then a6 at this point. Though this looks silly, it's actually quite useful. The idea is that if white captures black's pawn, the captured piece would also attack d7. So 1 second, let me make sure I have this. Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, I see what they're saying. The a6 move, and now if white were to capture the a6 pawn here, there's really no threat to the d7 pawn anymore. So thus placing the pawn on a6 for black will gain a tempo, since guarding d7 won't be an immediate necessity. So that's cool, huh? Queen a5. G4 was a playable move. I was looking at this. This is interesting, because what you're thinking of is promising is playing this move. If G6 were played here, this would also be a this would free black up from any real problems. You can try pushing here to lock the position down, and then try basically undermining eventually after the pieces come off. Try to undermine the king side entrance by playing something like this, but that would be kind of hard. White didn't want to do that. a6 were played here, king e3. h4, that he's saying is a playable idea. H4 is interesting. Again, it's another interesting move, but it's always good to bring your king in an endgame to the center, but you got to be careful that it doesn't get attacked. So G5, and then G3. Queen to B4 was played at this point. If let me see here. Oh, instead of G3, F takes, king D2. Hold on, what am I missing? Takes, there we go. Takes. King here. Queen b5. Queen takes. Rook takes. King c3. a5. Rook a2. And then king g6, trying to infiltrate in to get some attack. So b. Actually, I appreciate this. It's this was actually a mistake. It wasn't b5. I thought it was b5. Queen takes b4, rook takes b4, king d3, a5, king c3, g takes, g takes, and avoiding rook takes a5 because g takes, king b4, g2, rook a, and f4. And if you try to stop it here, and then there's no way to really stop, you could try to come back, but it's just too late because then you get a queen. Yeah. b5 to guard the pawn. Rook a1. King g6 get the king involved. Rook g1. King h5. Rook g8. Rook b7. It looks like black is making serious headway, but white now unlocks a savvy trick. This is actually a double exclam move. It's like, whoa. I know, I'm thinking to myself, hello. That move is incredible. A takes b check, and then king goes to b3, and it stops it in its tracks. h4, d5, exclam here. It's like, whoa. Rook b5. Because I know what you're thinking. A lot of people would just take here, but the problem is this actually wins on the spot. Because you can't take here, you'd lose your rook. You'd have to come there, and then after pawn takes, the game is basically over. And if you tried this here, then you have the same result with e6. And at this point, you'd have to play here, and then now you have to be careful that taking here, here, and then here. So, and at this, actually you don't need to play that. You can just leave that there, take here, take there, and you really can't stop the king from infiltrating in. This rook stops everything. If you could try that. And really there's not enough, there's no check really. You could try something like this, and then the queen happens, and it's like, ugh, not too promising at that point. So that's why they retreated back, was to cover the pawns. D takes E, D takes E, and then G6. And White's active rook will earn him a draw here. What you can play is here, after takes. You can bring the king up, and here, and here, and now there's enough activity that we can play here. You got to be careful because that can now go up the board. Yeah, you have to. This can go really bad fast. So we'll just delete that. There we go. Now we're going to be using pawn breaks. And we'll just get the pawns set up because there's not really much that could sit here. Oops, I have to do this here. Black to move here. This is the player's name. I know. This is the one guy's, that's another player's name. This is an internet game, so these are their just usernames. So you have to bear with it on this. Some of them are not what I'd call okay. But hey, you know what? It's what they choose. So you know what? We're gonna learn from everything. Don't always, as I like to say, judge a book by its cover. Make sure that you look into it, and you might find something that really helps your position here, or your learning process. Okay. A pawn break is a weapon of choice when facing an opponent who has a lot of pawns, has marched their pawns forward in an attempt to annex every square on the board. A pawn break either challenges your opponent's advanced structure head-on, or maps out its own space in another sector of the board. Here's an easy to understand example of how pawn breaks actually work. White is seeing that he could or she could grab queenside space. Queenside space has just played c4 to c5. It turns out that if white's a rook was protected, let's see. Okay, if white's a rook was protected, then this advance would be worthy of at least one of some consideration. However, the rook on a1 isn't protected, and thus the space gaining advantage of the c pawn is simply a mistake. I'm explaining the critical comment that the undefended a1 rook in the note to black's second move. This kind of error is made all the time on beginner level. So it's very important for the student to become familiar with the antidote to solving this and basically getting a good attack. This right here, b6, is actually a very strong continuation. This pawn break, which directly challenges the c5 pawn, the c5 pawn right away. Okay, c pawn right to be on that square. This refutes the idea. Now c takes b is pretty much forced. This is a pretty much forced move here. Though both a takes b and queen takes b gives black a very nice position. So after this, either takes here or takes here is really good for the pawn chain endgame. To understand why playing c takes b is basically a slap in the face for white, take a look that didn't come out right. Take a look at the position after c5. Which pawn is more valuable, white's c5 pawn or black's a pawn, a7 pawn? Clearly the more centralized c pawn is far better than the a pawn, a7 pawn. In general, a center pawn is more valuable than a wing pawn. Next, look at the position after c takes b, a takes b. In effect, white has exchanged his c pawn for black's a pawn. So by playing c5, white lost the tempo to trade his c pawn for black's a pawn, while also opening up a file for the previous rook that basically was nothing on a8. It is clear that white is in a very nice position. Of course, white didn't play c5 to swap it off for a wing pawn. He intended to keep his c pawn by giving it support. Thus, he now compounds his problems with a logical but tactical flaw. So this is a logical but tactical flaw. b4. This is a problem. This is a mistake. And then a5. Now you get to see how two pawn breaks from the air. Believe it or not, white is actually losing material here. Why? Because this whole queenside structure can't be maintained. And this takes us back to the understanding of the unprotected a1 rook that we commented on. If the a1 rook was on b1, or if the bishop was on b2 defending the rook, then a3 would support all the pawns. However, since the rook is undefended, the a3 pawn fails to a takes b4. White can't recapture because of the pin on the a file. This is what they're talking about here. You can't recapture because of that. It's critical that you fully understand why White's game is falling apart. So please explore this position and gain, no, again and again until it all makes perfect sense to you. So if you need to stop here right now, and let's say you're watching this on my YouTube channel, Chess Cruncher TV, then our Chess Cruncher, you can just stop right here and look and understand why a3 is wrong, why c4 to c5 was wrong, and see how you as a chess player could have fixed it and maybe prepared it before you got to before it got pushed. How is it possible to be prepared? Is there different ways? So if you want to do that, you can stop and go over it, set it up on a chessboard or on maybe a screen, and then just go over the lines if you'd like. Or you can continue to watch with us. Either way, it's always fun to do that. Queen a4. A noble try, but it's already too late to stop this attack. Note that c takes b leaves a takes b. Black is a full pawn ahead. So b takes c, or c takes b. A takes b leaves black a full pawn ahead. Since if you're trying to play here, then queen takes b6. Or if you're trying, let me see here. If you're trying bishop a6, then knight to a6 wins a pawn, since it simultaneously attacks b4 and c5. So if this were taken, this would be taken, and if this were taken, then you could actually potentially play bishop takes, knight takes. This pawn's attacked, this pawn's attacked twice, here and here. And if the queen tries to attack it, then what you can actually do is potentially try to exchange off another piece here. If takes, and if takes here, then you can actually take with check there. And now there's a big time problem. This is actually a lost game here. Boom, mate. So this is what a noble attempt is trying to do. So bishop to a6. Black is up to the challenge and finds the best move. White still can't avoid losing a pawn. a3. The poor black, that's what he says, is still dreaming of holding his chain together. Unfortunately, this idea is about to come face to face with the reality of what's going to happen. Bishop b5, exclam. This is exclam right here. Queen b3, a takes b, queen takes, c takes b, d takes, knight to a6, queen b2, and knight takes c5. And White's he's lost a pawn. His a pawn is weak, and he is behind in development. Now let's take a look at the same general structure, but this time White will play c4 to c5, knowing that he cannot maintain the advance of the c pawn. This is actually from a game. So let's see how we're doing here. Perfect. We have enough time for a game. Let's get the players put in there. Let's make sure I spelled everybody's name right. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, there we go. So d4, d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, e3, a6, knight c3, e6, c5, b6. The thematic pawn break, as we explained, b4 falls to a5. So c takes b. The space gaining c5 pawn has been forced off of its perch. But White's position idea is crystal clear. He wants to follow up with knight to a4 and play into d5. Controlling the control over the c5 and pressure against the backward pawn on c6. Black, of course, doesn't allow this to happen. Knight b to d7, knight a4. This position has occurred a lot over the years, but practice has shown that White can't expect to acquire a meaningful advantage in this one. So knight takes, and then the knight comes, bishop d2. Knight takes a4. Queen takes, bishop d7. Knight e5. And then c5. If White had been able to freeze Black's c-pawn on c6, then he would have stood better. However, the weak pawn is anything but helpless target. White had hoped it would be, for instance, a letting of a pawn, and basically letting the pawn sit there passively in place. Black challenges for the queenside space via a second pawn break. So knight takes here. Queen takes, takes. King takes. D takes c. Bishop takes. Now rook c1. H to c8. And then bishop to d3. Not a very exciting example, to say the least, but this does illustrate usefulness of pawn breaks as a means of freeing a position that's somewhat spatially challenged. You keep saying sparsely. It's spatially challenged. So far, we have seen a break with b6, a5, c5, and in the King's Indian, f5 mix with g5 to g4. Once one other majority break, one other majority break, let me see here, is the e5 to e7 break, and then there's an example. But White, of course, has his own series of breaks in different positions. But once you master the idea behind the topic, typical black breaks, the white breaks will easily be found too. You'll easily be able to find them. So we actually have enough time for another one. That was a quick one. So let's see if we can excuse me. on a second. Let me get a drink. I think this is a Caro-Kann if I'm not. Yep. The exchange variation. Not a very good move since white is going after space before he's even developed one single piece. E5. White's space gain structure is about to bite the dust, basically. That's what he's saying. Black has other reasonable moves like b6. Usually responds. It's usually a response in this kind of position, while the patient g6 also has been played. So you can play this, or you can play this move here. Is clearly the most challenge. E5, they said, is clearly the most challenging. It's clearly the most challenging and extreme attempt to refute the C5 push. This move starts an immediate fight, taking advantage of white's undeveloped army, and instantly attacks the C5 pawn, defended by D4. So D takes. Knight G4. E4 is also a good move too. Queen to D4 was actually a mistake here. White, who wants to directly basically dictate the matters with C5, is so taken back by the turn of events that he immediately makes a serious mistake. Knight C6, bishop B5, A5 check. You potentially could, if you wanted to, take this, but then that would fall. So it'd be kind of an interesting position after check here. If the queen came down, then you can actually play, if you wanted to, you can take queen takes, king takes, bishop takes, and then black's position falls apart, or you can do a challenging move of knight takes here, and then you win a rook there. So that's why that position, this is an okay move. It's challenging as well. Knight C3. Uh-oh. Let's see here. What did I miss here? Oh, that was a mistake. A5 check. Right there. Takes. Exclam. And the position of the pawns are going to fall apart because knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, and then the bishop takes. Knight G to F3. One pawn has already fallen. Knight takes, E5. This is a tactical idea. If takes here, then bishop takes, and then the knight comes back, and you've actually acquired. White has acquired a blackman has acquired almost a winning game here. So he played this here. Black castled and white castled. Appropriately, white, who was down a pawn, simply gave up because of how bad the position was. Armed with these pawn break patterns, let's look at a heavyweight example that mixed them all together. We get to do another one. Wow, we've went through a lot of these. Can't wait. Let me make sure I have the player spelt right. D4, D5, C4, C6, knight C3, knight F6, knight F3, A6, C5, bishop F5, bishop F4, E6, E3. It's really interesting. It's a Slav, but it reminds me of almost a kind of hyper London system. Knight BD7, bishop E2. Now the rook's protected, so if this could be my white's rook's protected, so you can't do that break anymore because of the the queen protects the rook. So there. White has obvious space advantage on the queen side. He also controls more space, the D6 and E6. In the center, if white can maintain its advantage in space while also avoiding unnecessary exchanges and not allowing freeing pawn breaks, black's position breaks are here and here. He'll have a clear advantage if he does that. Black will. Knight D2. Black has intended to play for a smooth exchange of the knights on E4. Well, that's why he plays knight D2, making the idea. Bishop to G6, rook C1, queen C8, A3, castles, G4, knight E8, H4. Black is pinning all hope on his second break, E6 to E5. Knight F3. Oops. Bishop S7. Let me see, what did I... Oh, F6 here. H5. Now he's hoping for this break. That's what now he's hoping for the break. I was 2 moves behind, but you know what? You gotta sometimes if you're doing that, just you can re-say it again. White by preventing black's hope for E6 to E5 push clearly wants a space advantage on every part of the board aside from mere space. The G4 H4 pawn duo intends to sweep black's kingside pawns away too. The idea is that black seems void of any counterplay, while means whites will have a free hand. So black has no counterplay. White will have a free hand on either wing. However, things aren't that simple. Though black normally could play b3, b7 to b6, so this move here, black wants these two breaks, but he can't really get them in, has been rendered inactive for the moment. Opening the C file so that the C rook stares at C6 seems more than a little risky. He's poisoning himself to smacking open the center and having that type of idea. So basically, if he plays this move here, the pawn takes and this C rook will become a monster. So really the only chance that black has is e5 to or e6 to e5. Knight c7, so he's not going to go down that route. If bishop d8 here, followed by bishop to c7, e6 to e5 is a logical recommendation by I think it's black. Yeah, would be the logical thing for black. So this doesn't do really much. So knight a4, and the idea is to potentially get this move here and try to get knight to a6 in there, or b6, and just clog up the whole setup. Clamping down on the queen side, giving c5 more support, so that so once a4 is in play, so then after that a4, what would happen after this move? After this move, the knight could retreat back and a4 could actually be played. So this is just a tremendous move here. Black is basically running out of space. So bishop d3, and now e5 is black's only hope. Black refuses to passively sit around and wait for the position to basically collapse. Instead, thanks to the key break, he sacrifices a pawn so that his pieces jump to life and give him serious counterplay. White might still be better, but things will now become far more complex. Mistakes are frequently visited when the opponent is suddenly basically punched back or hit back. So d takes, knight to knight to e6. Here we go. E takes f6. Queen to c2 is also interesting. h6. Bishop f5 is critical, but wild complications arise after knight takes here. E takes, f takes, f takes, and then bishop g5. There's huge wild as I see so far here. We're going to take a quick look at two variations. Rook to d1, knight takes g5. These are the two variations. Rook d1, we're going to take a look. We're going to go through this really efficiently. Knight takes e. Oops. Takes g, but knight takes here. Queen e7. Castles. Queen takes, knight b. 8 d8. Knight d7. Rook takes d, bishop takes. Queen e7. Bishop f5. Bishop f4. Rook b8. Oh, rook d4 and then rook b8. Oh, that's the problem. And the vulnerable dark squares around the king give black adequate chances, like rook b3, d4. Equal. Yeah, g3. White has some annoying problems, so. So also one last line. This is an interesting, oops, wrong. But is this true? Instead, is bishop takes. White can do better with I could actually do better with h6 here. Exclam. Knight takes. H takes G. King takes. Rook h7 check. Rook h6. With a clear advantage. So then knight takes the pawn. a5. Knight takes. Queen c7. g5. Knight to b4. Black has some compensation in the form of white's offset knight on a4, the central king, and time pressure. So in the end, white missed his chance and eventually went down to defeat here. g3. We're going to do this really quick, so. And then we're going to say adieu on this one. Wow, he's threatening mate with this. playing really strong, trying. King, slowly but steadily. Play Queen F5 here. I'm wondering if this doesn't. Let's see. And then White resigned here because the idea is if bishop takes here, that check, and then once the king comes over, this actually is mate. So we'll stop here. I know it's silent a little bit, but I want to get the moves in. There was a lot of moves here. So this is actually where they resigned, is right here, not here, right here. So I'll put a box by the resignation spot so you can find it. And that's why they resigned. Dual threat of mate and the bishop. Okay, so what we learned here is that you got to be careful which pawns that you're pushing, because if you push the wrong pawns that can't be supported, even if you gained space, your opponent's going to try to punch right back and take advantage and say that your gain of space was actually a weakness. So make sure that you have ample support for your pawns. Make sure that the moves that you played are the ones that will hold a position. And always remember to have fun playing chess. Always, like I like to say, is that, and just keep up the good work. You know, it's one of those things that sometimes you know, you just have to always be wanting to improve and getting better. And there's one other line I wanted to show you. If well, let me see. Really, you can't. I was looking to see if we could take here, but I don't think there's a way to take there. So that was down the line. But just remember, make sure your moves are good. My teacher told me if you check your moves and they're not bad, and they can be played, then more power to you to actually do it. So just keep that in your forefront of your thought, that you don't get nervous when you're under pressure, and play the best moves. Okay, I want to thank you for logging on, participating, and you know what? Take this to heart, and remember to take what you know and be able to apply it, be willing to do something with it. And always, always, if you don't understand something, stop and go over it. Don't just hammer through it, because that's not how you learn. How you learn is to struggle with the information a little bit, and then if you need help, go to the answers. But just try your hardest to find it yourself, and you'll improve. And when you do the Tom Thumb Thumb motto of treasure your victories, learn from your losses. Remember, the mistakes do not define who you are. It's how you handle the mistake that defines who you are, and what you do, and that you honor the Lord Jesus. And remember that in the end, the choice to receive the Lord Jesus, Lord and Savior, is always a good move. Because you know what? He's there for you. It's not an easy road. Remember, even in chess, when you're learning, it's bumpy. You're going to make mistakes, but guess what? Keep pushing forward, getting up, wipe off your knees and the scratches, and keep pushing forward. Don't ever stop. So just think about receiving Jesus, Lord and Savior of your life. Okay. And remember the Team Chess Cruncher motto of hanging up your coats, hanging up your hats, sitting down and studying when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. And as Wesley So says, serve the Lord Jesus. As I say, God bless, and I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow. We'll keep pushing forward, onward, and upward, and improving. Remember what Hannibal Smith said: even inside of a random position, there's always a plan. When you take your time and you find it and you get to implement it, you get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, great job, team. Keep learning, improving, getting better. Go over the tape again and again and again till you get it, and have fun. Bye-bye, team. Go Team Chess Cruncher. Hoorah.